At the height of its power, in the 7th century BC, the Assyrian Empire extended its arms from Egypt to Iran, featuring an army in the hundreds of thousands, a network of canals and roads stretching for thousands of miles, and an agricultural production capacity for millions of people. But it was not always this way. Only 100 years before, the Assyrian state struggled to keep its holdings and maintain the crown's strength. Influential high dignitaries ran the administration and took credit for imperial victories, while eastern Aramaean kingdoms and the northern bastion of Urartu began to slowly infringe on Assyrian control. Assyria was surely on the path to a tragic end. But there arose a man in the office of the king, Tiglath-pileser, who was able to beat back the enemies of his kingdom and reassert the might of his office, successfully putting Assyria on the map and setting the stage for imperial dominance. In 745 BC, a revolt broke out in the Assyrian capital of Kalhu, modern Nimrud. On one end, Ashurnasirpal V was king, and on the other, Tiglath-pileser III. We know very little about the incident, so it is hard to tell who was involved or why. Some speculate Tiglath-pileser was the instigator and a usurper. Others propose a coincidence, Tiglath-pileser being the son and legitimate heir of Ashurnasirpal V. But with the information we possess, certainty is impossible. What we do know is that the new king came to the throne ready to take swift and robust action to repair the crumbling state. The high dignitaries were one of his first targets. In the absence of strong royal power, they had become a stand-in. Complacent with their great power, these men sat on their lofty thrones in far-off palaces, commanding the armies of the west and the north, assuming duties no one but the king should have had. Some actually played a critical role militarily, but that did not change the way they had detracted from the office of the king, and thus the divine appointment of the god Ashur. One of the most powerful men to be neutralized by Tiglath-pileser was the former commander-in-chief, Shamshi-Ilu, whose personal inscriptions were totally scrubbed from the record. Other dignitaries were luckier, and some were even granted titles and rewards as a way for the king to increase their debt to him, and more closely associate them with his central authority. Once large provinces were broken into smaller pieces as a way to curb the power of governors, and constant wars of conquest kept their energies focused away from building power. As a final measure, Tiglath-pileser replaced most of his officials with eunuchs, eliminating their ability to start dynastic lines, and keeping their loyalty to the king above all others. The rapid expansion of Assyria under Tiglath-pileser has been suggested to be opportunism and luck by some. Others believe he was a calculated military genius. The truth, as with many things, seems to lie somewhere in the middle. His first campaigns were part of an important strategy to neutralize his enemies and secure his position. First, he struck in Babylonia. The invasive Aramaean kingdoms fell to the strength of his army, creating desperately needed room for him to operate in the south. With a semblance of control in this area, he could access the lucrative trade routes feeding into the Persian Gulf and protect against his enemies to the east. In 744, he launched attacks into the Zagros Mountains, annexing some of the mountain peoples to create the province of Parsua. Subsequently, he continued to subjugate several other western Iranian territories. This ensured he had a strong foothold in the region. The now conquered regions around the Zagros could serve as a buffer between the Assyrians and Urartians in the north, who were of primary concern to the growing empire. With not even a year's rest, the armies of Assyria launched again in 743, this time to subdue a rebellion. Mati-Il, the ruler of Arpad, had violated an earlier treaty concluded under the Assyrians and sought action against Assyrian power. The previous treaty was probably made null after Urartu had defeated Tiglath-pileser's predecessor in the area, but it worked as a good excuse to head to battle. The risk of defeat was a significant one. as Arpad was part of a league with a number of other local kingdoms and what some have described as an anti-Assyrian league. The coalition formed by Arpad and its neighbors should not be understood entirely in terms of anti-Assyrian aims, however, as it would have also been useful for the protection of local interests. A recently unstable political situation encouraged this kind of cooperation as a means to ensure stability. If the force of the coalition was not enough to deal with, Tiglath-pileser was also up against the Urartians, who had an interest in the region. Sarduri II had defeated the previous Assyrian king, Ashurnasirpal V, around Arpad, and continued to promote Urartian interests in the region. Some scholars even argue the focus of the Arpad campaign was really against the growing power of Urartu in the region, but this remains unconfirmed. In any case, the threat of Sarduri II and the Arpad coalition was strong, and the outcome would prove to be seminal for further Assyrian involvement in the west. On the march out west, Tiglath-pileser claims he was moving so swiftly there was no time for his soldiers to stop and rest, or even drink. The army went forward day and night until they could confront the enemy. Like a mighty wave, he descended to crush his opponents. The Assyrian account of the battle with the Urartians runs as follows. Between the lands of Kishtan and Halpi, districts of the land of Kumuhu, I utterly defeated them. The blood of their warriors, I dyed the Sinzi River as red as dyed wool. I defeated him, Sarduri, and took his entire camp away from him. He became frightened of the terrifying radiance of my weapons, and fled alone in order to save his life. Even accepting the apparent level of exaggeration contained in this text, it appears the defeat of Urartu was decisive, as they would not interfere in the region for quite some time. Sarduri had been forced to retreat on his steed across a floating bridge, and though he was not captured, his hopes for the region were dashed. Many of the co-conspiring kingdoms, like Kumuhu, were spared as they were more valuable as independent vassals. Riding high off his victory against the might of Urartu, Tiglath-pileser continued to Arpad. The city was hard to break into, so he was forced to lay a 3-year siege. Unfortunately, few details survive of what must have been an intense struggle for the city. But by 740, its walls had fallen, and the entire territory of the city and its kingdom were annexed to the Assyrian Empire, making it the first new western province in what would become a very long list of them. This initial foray toward the west may not have been part of a grand strategy, but its success opened the door for total conquest. If you found value in this video, make sure to subscribe, as it really helps expose the channel to new audiences. In the interest of time, I have chosen to break the story of Tiglath-pileser into 3 parts, which will be released in the coming weeks. Next, we will explore the final domination of the West and the Assyrian motivations behind it.